Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time there was a sweet little maid. Everyone loved her on sight, but no one loved her as much as her grandmother, who could not begin to stop doting on her. One time she gave her a hood of red satin as a present, and because it suited her so well, and she didn't want to wear anything else ever again, she was simply called Little Red Riding Hood. One day her mother said to her, "Here, Little Red Riding Hood, here's a piece of cake and a bottle of wine. Take them over to grandmother. She is sick and weak, and they will help her get better. Get on your way before it gets hot, and on your way be nice and good and don't run off the path, or you'll fall down and break the glass, and grandmother will have nothing. And when you come into her room, don't forget to say good morning, and don't look in all the corners first." "Okay, I'll do everything right," said Little Red Riding Hood to her mother, and placed her hand in hers as a pledge. However, the grandmother lived out in the forest, half an hour's walk from the village, and once Little Red Riding Hood was in the forest, she came upon the wolf. But Little Red Riding Hood did not know what an evil beast he was, and was not afraid of him. "Good morning, Little Red Riding Hood," he said.
"And to you, Mr. Wolf."
"Where are you going so early, Little Red Riding Hood?"
"To my grandmother's."
"What do you have there under your pinafore?"
"Cake and wine. We did baking yesterday, so my poor sick, weak grandmother needs to get some and get better."
"Little Red Riding Hood, where does your grandmother live?"
"A good quarter of an hour deeper in the forest, under the 3 big oak trees. That's where her house is, with the hazelnut hedges. You must know it,"
said Little Red Riding Hood. The wolf thought to himself, "This sweet young thing, this is some tender morsel. She's going to taste even better than the old lady. This is going to take some smart moves, but we've got to bag them both." Then for a while he walked along with Little Red Riding Hood. Then he said, "Little Red Riding Hood, just look at the beautiful flowers all around us. Why aren't you looking? I bet you don't even hear how prettily the birds are singing. You're just walking straight ahead as if you were on your way to school, and it's so lovely out here in the forest." Little Red Riding Hood opened her eyes, and when she saw how the sunbeams were dancing in and out between the trees, and how everywhere there were beautiful flowers, she thought,
"If I bring Granny a freshly picked bunch of flowers, that will make her happy too. It's so early that I'll still get there on time,"
and ran off the path into the forest looking for flowers. When she had picked one, she thought there was a nicer one further off, and ran after it, and got further and further into the forest. But the wolf went directly to the grandmother's house and knocked on the door.
"Who's there?"
"Little Red Riding Hood, bringing you cake and wine. Open the door."
"Just press on the latch,"
grandmother called.
"I'm too weak and can't get up."
The wolf pressed on the latch, the door opened, and without saying a word he went straight to the grandmother's bed and swallowed her. Then he put on her clothes, put her bonnet on his head, lay down in her bed, and pulled the curtains closed. But Little Red Riding Hood had been running around after flowers, and when she had collected so many that she could not hold any more, she remembered about her grandmother and set off for her house. She was surprised that the door was open, and when she went in she got such a strange feeling that she thought,
"My goodness, what a scaredy cat I am today, and I usually really like visiting Granny."
She called out,
"Good morning,"
but there was no answer. Then she went over to the bed and drew back the curtains. There lay her grandmother, and she had pushed her bonnet down low over her face and looked really odd.
"Why, Granny, what big ears you have."
"The better to hear you with."
"Why, Granny, what big eyes you have."
"The better to see you with."
"Why, Granny, what big hands you have."
"The better to grab you with."
"But, Granny, what a frightfully big mouth you have."
"The better to eat you with." No sooner had the wolf said that than he leapt out of the bed and gobbled up poor Little Red Riding Hood. When the wolf had sated his appetite, he lay back in the bed, fell asleep, and began to snore excessively loudly. The huntsman was just passing by the house and thought, "How the old lady does snore. You'd better go see if she needs anything." Then he walked in, and when he came to the bed, he saw the wolf lying in it. "So I find you here, you old reprobate," he said. I've been hunting for you for a long time." Then he was about to cock his shotgun when it occurred to him that the wolf could have eaten the grandmother and she might yet be rescuable. He didn't shoot. Instead, he took a pair of shears and began to cut open the sleeping wolf's belly. When he had made a couple of cuts, he saw the Red Hood peeping out, and a couple more cuts, and the girl sprang out, shouting,
"Oh, I was so scared. It was so dark in the wolf's tummy."
And then out came the old grandmother, also still alive, and hardly able to breathe. But Little Red Riding Hood quickly fetched big rocks, and they filled up the wolf's belly with them, and when he woke up, he wanted to run away. But the rocks were so heavy that he immediately collapsed and was dead on the floor. Then all three of them were happy. The huntsman cut off the wolf's pelt and went home with it. The grandmother ate the cake and drank the wine that Little Red Riding Hood had brought and felt better again. But Little Red Riding Hood thought, "Oh, the days of your life! You will never go off the path alone into the forest when your mother told you not to." There is also a tale that one time when Little Red Riding Hood was again bringing baked goods to her elderly grandmother, another wolf spoke to her and tried to lure her off the path. But Little Red Riding Hood was sensible and went directly on her way and told her grandmother that a wolf had met her on the way and wished her good morning, but had such a wicked look in his eyes. "If I hadn't been in plain view on the road, he would have eaten me." "Come with me," her grandmother said. "We will lock the door so he can't get in." Soon afterwards the wolf knocked at the door and called out, "Open up, Granny, it's Little Red Riding Hood bringing you cake." But they kept completely silent and did not open the door. Then Greyhead slunk around the house a few times and finally jumped up on the roof, planning to wait until Little Red Riding Hood went home that evening. Then he meant to slink after her and eat her up in the dark. But the grandmother figured out what he had in mind. Now in front of the house there was a big stone trough. So she said to the child, "Get the pail, Little Red Riding Hood. Yesterday I boiled sausages. Pour the water they were cooked on into the trough." Little Red Riding Hood carried so many pails of water out that the big trough was completely full. Then the aroma of the sausages reached the wolf's nose. He snuffled and looked down, and finally he stretched out his neck so far that he couldn't hold on any longer and started to slip. And he slipped down from the roof right into the big trough and drowned. But Little Red Riding Hood went happily home, and nobody harmed a hair of her head.